The day a mother disowns her own daughter for choosing love over wealth is the day the truth quietly begins preparing its greatest entrance. The grand ballroom of Harrison Global Tower shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most families would earn in a lifetime. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided silently between marble columns, balancing silver trays filled with sparkling water and delicate hors d'oeuvres while a string quartet performed softly from the balcony above. Every guest wore confidence as naturally as tailored designer suits and custom evening gowns. Governors, Fortune 500 executives, senators, philanthropists, and media personalities exchanged polished smiles beneath the glow of warm golden lights. Tonight was supposed to celebrate another milestone for Victoria Harrison, America's self-made billionaire CEO whose empire stretched from renewable energy to luxury hospitality. Instead, before anyone realized it, the evening was about to become something no amount of money could control. Victoria stood at the center of the stage, elegant in a midnight blue gown that reflected the lights like polished sapphire. At 61, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades making billion-dollar decisions without hesitation. Every conversation faded as she lifted her glass. Beside the stage stood her daughter, Emily Harrison, 32 years old, graceful, intelligent, and wearing a simple ivory dress that seemed almost understated among the extravagant crowd. Her hand rested gently inside the hand of the man she loved. Ethan Carter wore an older charcoal suit that fit well, but carried the subtle signs of years rather than luxury. His polished shoes had been carefully maintained instead of recently purchased. His calm blue eyes revealed neither embarrassment nor pride. Beside him stood his 10-year-old son, Noah, dressed neatly in a navy blazer, quietly observing a room where almost no one had bothered to acknowledge their arrival. Whispered conversations drifted through the ballroom. "That's him? I thought she'd marry someone from Wall Street. Isn't he just a single dad? Someone said he works a regular job now. She threw everything away for him." The comments floated like invisible smoke, never loud enough to become confrontation, yet sharp enough to settle over the room. Ethan heard them. He simply squeezed Noah's shoulder once before returning his attention to Emily. She answered with a gentle smile that carried more confidence than words ever could. Victoria lowered her glass and looked directly at her daughter. The warmth disappeared from her face. "Emily," she said, her voice calm enough to make the silence even heavier, "if you marry this man tonight, you will no longer be my daughter. You will receive nothing from this family. No inheritance, no shares, no place in this company. Walk away from him now, and everything remains yours." A collective breath caught across the ballroom. Cameras stopped moving. Even the musicians quietly lowered their bows. Emily never looked toward the audience. She looked only at Ethan. Then she slowly slipped the Harrison family ring from her finger and placed it gently on the crystal podium beside her mother. "I'd rather build a life with a good man than inherit a fortune without one," she answered softly. No one applauded. No one spoke. Beyond the towering ballroom doors, unnoticed by nearly everyone inside, a black sedan rolled quietly beneath the front entrance canopy as another guest stepped out into the cool evening air, carrying with him a truth that would soon leave the most powerful woman in the room struggling to remain standing. The silence lingered long after Emily's words settled over the ballroom. No one rushed toward her. No one defended her. The guests who had admired courage in business suddenly found themselves uncomfortable in the presence of courage in real life. Ethan quietly reached for the small overnight bag resting beside Noah's chair. There was no anger in his movements, no desperate attempt to change anyone's mind. He simply accepted the weight of the moment the way a man accepts an unexpected storm, knowing that fighting the weather never changes the sky. Noah looked up at his father with calm eyes that seemed far older than his 10 years. "Are we leaving, Dad?" he asked softly. Ethan smiled with the same gentle warmth that had carried the boy through every difficult chapter since his mother's passing. "Only if Emily still wants to come with us," he answered. Emily stepped beside them without hesitation. "I already made my choice. Victoria remained perfectly still on the stage, her expression carved from years of discipline. Yet something in her eyes searched desperately for hesitation that never appeared. She had negotiated mergers worth billions of dollars. She had stared down hostile investors and ruthless competitors. Yet she had never imagined her own daughter would calmly walk away from everything she had built. Around the ballroom, whispers returned in careful waves. She will regret this. Love does not pay property taxes. He cannot possibly give her the life she is throwing away. Ethan heard every word. He answered none of them. Instead, he bent slightly toward Noah, adjusting the boy's tie that had shifted during the evening. "There," he said quietly. Looking sharp, Noah grinned. "You always fix everything." Ethan chuckled softly. "Not everything, just the things I can reach." Emily watched the exchange with eyes that shimmered beneath the ballroom lights. She had spent months getting to know Ethan before ever meeting his son. She had discovered that every morning began before sunrise because Ethan insisted on making Noah breakfast before school, even when work demanded long hours. Every Friday evening, they visited the neighborhood library together. Every Sunday, they volunteered at a local community food pantry without posting photographs or telling anyone afterward. There had never been expensive gifts, luxury vacations, or promises of glamorous living. There had only been consistency, honesty, patience, and quiet kindness. Those were qualities Emily had searched for her entire life without realizing they could never be purchased. Victoria saw only an ordinary man in an aging suit. Emily saw someone who never needed an audience to do the right thing. As they reached the ballroom entrance, an elderly doorman hurried forward and opened the massive oak doors with a respectful nod. The cool autumn air drifted inside, carrying the faint scent of rain from the city streets below. Ethan paused for a brief moment, turning back toward Victoria. The room seemed to hold its breath once again, expecting a final argument, a plea, or perhaps one last attempt to defend himself. Instead, his voice remained steady and remarkably gentle. "I truly hope that one day you will see the same daughter I see tonight." Then he simply nodded, took Noah's hand, and walked beside Emily into the quiet evening, leaving behind a room filled with unimaginable wealth and an emptiness that even its owner had not yet begun to understand. The next morning arrived without headlines, without reporters, and without any dramatic announcement. The world continued moving as though nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. The morning traffic filled the streets of downtown Chicago. Coffee shops welcomed their regular customers, and office towers reflected the pale sunlight across polished glass. Inside a modest two-story home on a quiet suburban street, however, life had already begun to take a very different shape. Emily stood in the small kitchen wearing one of Ethan's oversized sweaters as she watched him prepare pancakes, while Noah packed his school backpack at the dining table. The house was not luxurious. The hardwood floors carried years of careful use. The dining chairs had been repaired more than once, and family photographs filled almost every shelf instead of expensive artwork. Yet there was a warmth inside those walls that Emily had never experienced growing up inside a mansion staffed by employees who knew every schedule but very little about one another. Ethan placed a plate on the table with a smile. "Breakfast first, big decisions afterward." Noah laughed. "Dad says pancakes solve almost everything." Ethan raised an eyebrow playfully. "Not everything, but they certainly improve difficult conversations." Emily smiled, although her thoughts drifted toward the events of the previous evening. Her phone had remained silent through dinner, but overnight, dozens of messages had arrived. Some came from old friends expressing concern. Others quietly advised her to apologize to her mother before it was too late. Several board members from Harrison Global politely informed her that her corporate accounts had already been suspended and her office access revoked. One formal email confirmed that every financial privilege connected to the Harrison Family Trust had been terminated effective immediately. Emily closed the messages without responding. Ethan noticed the change in her expression, but did not ask to read her phone. He simply poured fresh coffee into her mug and sat across from her. "You do not have to prove your choice to anyone," he said gently. "Not even to yourself." She looked at him for a long moment. Does it ever become easier when people judge you without knowing you? Ethan leaned back quietly before answering. No, you simply learn that their opinion cannot become the foundation of your peace. Noah listened while spreading maple syrup across his pancakes. Mom used to say something like that. The room became still for a brief moment. Ethan smiled softly at the memory instead of turning away from it. She did. Emily reached across the table and rested her hand over Ethan's. She had rarely heard him speak about his late wife, never because he wished to hide the past, but because he believed love deserved quiet respect rather than constant explanation. That gentle restraint had always impressed her more than grand speeches ever could. Later that afternoon, while Noah attended school, Ethan drove his aging pickup truck to a neighborhood community center where he volunteered twice each week, helping teenagers prepare college scholarship applications. Most of the students had no idea that the patient man reviewing essays beside them had once built a career that reached far beyond anything listed on his modest resume. Ethan never corrected assumptions. He believed character introduced itself better than titles ever could. Across the city, inside the executive boardroom of Harrison Global, Victoria stared through floor-to-ceiling windows as directors presented alarming reports. A critical partnership involving several federal infrastructure projects had suddenly entered uncertain territory. One senior executive cleared his throat carefully before speaking. There is only one independent consultant with the credibility to bring every party back to the table. Victoria folded her hands calmly. Then schedule the meeting immediately. The executive hesitated. We already tried, ma'am. The room fell silent. His office declined. Victoria slowly turned toward the board, unaware that the quiet man she had dismissed less than 24 hours earlier was about to become the one person every powerful executive in the room desperately needed to find. 3 days passed, and the distance between two worlds grew wider without either side realizing how quickly life was rearranging itself. Inside Ethan's modest home, mornings settled into a peaceful rhythm that Emily had never known. Noah left cheerful notes on the refrigerator before school. Ethan watered the small vegetable garden every sunrise. Evenings ended with books instead of board meetings, homemade dinners instead of formal banquets, and conversations that never revolved around quarterly profits or market forecasts. Emily found herself laughing more often than she had in years. The quiet surprised her. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of belonging. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, Harrison Global Headquarters had become a building filled with polished confidence, hiding growing uncertainty. The Federal Infrastructure Partnership represented nearly $5 billion in future contracts, employing thousands of workers across multiple states. Investors were beginning to ask difficult questions. Government representatives delayed signatures. International partners requested additional guarantees. Every executive around Victoria Harrison's conference table seemed to have an opinion, yet none carried the authority needed to restore complete confidence. We have offered every incentive imaginable, Chief Financial Officer Daniel Brooks admitted, adjusting his glasses. Additional guarantees, revised timelines, expanded compliance reviews. Nothing has changed. Victoria folded her hands. People do not walk away from opportunities like this without a reason. Daniel hesitated before answering. This is not about money anymore. Another executive quietly opened a presentation on a large screen. A single name appeared in the center. Ethan Carter. Victoria frowned almost immediately. That is impossible. No, ma'am, Daniel replied carefully. It is highly unusual, but not impossible. Victoria slowly stood from her chair and approached the screen. Explain. The room became unusually quiet. Daniel cleared his throat. The Independent National Infrastructure Review Council will not approve the final partnership until their senior strategic advisor completes the evaluation. Victoria looked impatient. Then schedule the evaluation. We tried. Then call again. Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment. His office respectfully declined every request. Victoria's expression hardened. Why would one advisor have authority over multiple federal agencies? No one answered immediately. Finally, The company's legal director spoke, because he earned it over many years. His recommendations have never once failed. Every administration, regardless of political party, has trusted his independent judgment. Victoria stared at the screen again. The photograph displayed Ethan wearing a simple navy suit, offering the same calm smile she had dismissed only days earlier. It was an older professional portrait, one she had never seen before. There were no luxury watches, no extravagant background, no display of wealth, just quiet confidence. There must be another consultant, Victoria insisted. There are many consultants, Daniel answered. There is only one Ethan Carter. The words settled heavily across the boardroom. Victoria felt an unfamiliar sensation she had spent decades avoiding. Uncertainty. She remembered the old suit, the worn leather shoes, the steady voice that had never once argued with her. She had mistaken simplicity for weakness because she had become accustomed to measuring people by visible success. At that same moment, Ethan sat inside the community center helping a high school senior revise a college admission essay. The nervous teenager sighed. Do you think they will believe someone like me belongs there? Ethan handed the paper back with an encouraging smile. People may doubt your story yet. First, your character will finish telling it. The student smiled with renewed confidence, completely unaware that the man offering those simple words was quietly becoming the center of conversations in boardrooms, government offices, and executive suites across the country, while Ethan himself remained far more interested in helping one young dream than protecting his own reputation. The following Monday began beneath a gray Chicago sky as steady rain traced quiet lines across the windows of Harrison Global Headquarters. Employees walked through the revolving doors with lowered voices, sensing that something had shifted inside the company. Elevators filled with conversations that stopped the moment senior executives entered. Even a reception desk, normally buzzing with cheerful greetings, felt restrained beneath the weight of uncertainty. On the 42nd floor, Victoria Harrison sat alone in her office before sunrise, reading every document her staff had managed to gather about Ethan Carter. The file was surprisingly thin. No interviews, no magazine covers, no social media presence, no speeches celebrating personal achievements. Only years of completed advisory reports, government commendations, and handwritten letters of appreciation from local schools, nonprofit organizations, and veterans' families. The absence of self-promotion unsettled her more than any impressive resume could have. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel Brooks entered carrying another folder. We received a response this morning, he said carefully. Victoria looked up immediately. From Mr. Carter? Daniel nodded. His office agreed to attend one meeting. Relief briefly crossed her face before Daniel quietly added, only because the council requested it, not because we requested it. Victoria accepted the folder without speaking. Inside was a formal invitation scheduling a joint strategic review at the Grand Lakes Conference Center on Friday morning. Representatives from federal agencies, infrastructure partners, engineering firms, and independent oversight committees would all be present. Harrison Global had one opportunity to secure the partnership. Daniel remained standing. There is one more detail. Victoria closed the folder. Go on. Mr. Carter specifically requested that no special accommodations be prepared for him. No executive suite. No private security. No media coverage. He asked to be treated exactly like every other participant. Victoria slowly leaned back in her chair. She remembered Ethan quietly carrying Noah's overnight bag after being rejected in front of hundreds of influential guests. Even then, he had asked for nothing. Across town, Ethan finished replacing a loose shelf inside Noah's bedroom before helping him pack for school. Noah zipped his backpack and smiled. Miss Emily says she might bake cookies tonight. Ethan laughed softly. Then I hope you saved room after dinner. Emily stepped into the hallway holding a cup of coffee. You have that meeting on Friday. Ethan nodded. Just another review. She studied him for a moment. You knew about Harrison Global before everyone else, did not you? Ethan remained silent long enough for the answer to become obvious. Finally, he smiled gently. I recognized the company the first night. Why did you never tell me? She asked quietly. Ethan looked toward the family photographs lining the hallway. Because I wanted you to choose this family before you discovered anything about my work. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Every day revealed another layer of the man she had married. Yet none of those layers centered on power or prestige. They all returned to the same quiet foundation of humility. Later that afternoon, Victoria received confirmation that governors, federal commissioners, military logistics advisors, and several internationally respected engineers had all accepted invitations to Friday's review. One message at the bottom of the schedule caught her attention. Upon arrival, all participants will stand for the entrance of the council's senior strategic advisor before the proceedings begin. Victoria read the sentence twice. She assumed the gesture honored the position rather than the individual. She had no idea that every person in that room had reasons far more personal than protocol for showing respect, and that within a few days she would witness a welcome unlike anything she had experienced in her decades at the top of the corporate world. Friday morning arrived wrapped in crisp autumn air as the Grand Lakes Conference Center overlooked the quiet shoreline beneath a sky brushed with pale silver clouds. Black government sedans lined the circular entrance, while security officers greeted arriving guests with practiced professionalism. Inside the main conference hall, polished walnut walls reflected the warm glow of crystal lighting, and a massive American flag stood beside the stage where the strategic review would soon begin. Every seat around the horseshoe-shaped conference table carried the name of someone whose decisions influenced thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in public investment. Governors exchanged handshakes with engineering executives. Federal commissioners reviewed briefing folders beside military logistics advisors. Conversations remained respectful but subdued, as though everyone understood that today's meeting carried consequences beyond financial reports. Victoria Harrison entered with Daniel Brooks several minutes before the scheduled opening. Heads turned politely, acknowledging one of the nation's most successful business leaders. She accepted the greetings with her usual confidence. Yet beneath her composed expression lingered a question she could not answer. Why had so many accomplished people spoken about Ethan Carter with such remarkable respect? She took her assigned seat and noticed one chair at the center of the table remained empty. The nameplate simply read Senior Strategic Advisor. There were no honorary titles, no lengthy list of accomplishments, only the name Ethan Carter engraved in understated black lettering. Victoria stared at it longer than she intended. Around the room, conversations gradually faded. At precisely 9 o'clock, the conference moderator approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your punctuality. Our senior strategic advisor has arrived. The double doors at the rear of the hall opened quietly. There was no dramatic music, no announcement beyond those simple words. Ethan Carter stepped inside wearing a well-tailored navy suit, carrying a worn leather portfolio that looked as though it had accompanied him for many years. His expression remained calm, neither proud nor uncomfortable, as though entering rooms like this had never changed the person he chose to be. Then something happened that Victoria had not expected. One chair moved, then another. Within seconds, every governor, commissioner, executive, engineer, and military representative rose to their feet. The room became completely silent except for the soft sound of chairs sliding backward across polished hardwood floors. No one had been instructed to applaud. No one spoke. They simply stood. Several people smiled warmly as Ethan walked forward. An elderly Army general stepped away from his seat first, extending both hands. Good to see you again, Ethan. A former cabinet secretary nodded respectfully. It has been too long. A renowned civil engineer quietly added, "We have been looking forward to your guidance." Ethan greeted each person with the same gentle smile, never lingering, never seeking attention. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I appreciate everyone's time." Victoria remained standing because everyone else remained standing, but the confidence she had carried into the room was quietly slipping away. These were people who rarely admired anyone publicly. Yet every face reflected genuine respect rather than obligation. Daniel leaned closer and whispered carefully, "Ma'am, I have worked with many influential people over 30 years. I have never seen a reception like this. Victoria could not answer. Ethan finally reached the center chair and placed his portfolio on the table before looking around the room. His eyes briefly met Victoria's. There was no resentment in them. No triumph. Only the same quiet kindness she had dismissed as weakness less than a week earlier. As everyone resumed their seats, the moderator smiled respectfully toward Ethan before saying, "With your permission, sir, we are ready to begin." And for the first time in her remarkable career, Victoria Harrison realized she was no longer sitting across the table from a man she believed needed her approval. She was sitting before someone whose character had already earned the respect that power alone could never buy. The conference moderator invited the first speaker to present an overview of the proposed infrastructure partnership. But before the presentation could begin, an elderly governor slowly rose from his seat and looked toward Ethan with a warm smile. "Before we discuss numbers," he said, "I believe several people in this room deserve to understand why so many of us insisted that Mr. Carter be present today." The room became still once again. Ethan offered a polite smile and quietly shook his head. "Governor, that is not necessary." The governor smiled back. "With respect, Ethan, humility has served you well for many years. But truth serves everyone." A few gentle laughs eased the tension before silence returned. The governor continued. 8 years ago, my state faced the largest transportation failure in its history. Every consultant promised expensive solutions. Ethan was the only person who spent 3 days walking the roads, speaking with local families, truck drivers, teachers, and first responders before writing a single recommendation. His plan finished under budget, ahead of schedule, and has protected thousands of lives ever since. Victoria listened without moving. Another voice followed. It belonged to a distinguished woman who led one of the nation's largest engineering organizations. "Our company offered Ethan a compensation package worth more than $20 million. He thanked us, declined politely, and suggested we invest those funds into scholarship programs for engineering students instead. More than 400 young people have graduated because of that decision." Murmurs of quiet admiration spread across the room. Ethan lowered his eyes slightly, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. A retired Air Force general adjusted his glasses before speaking next. "Most people know Ethan as an advisor. I remember him as the man who spent Christmas Eve visiting military families whose loved ones were deployed overseas. He arrived without photographers, without media, and without announcing his name. I only learned it years later." The general smiled gently. Character leaves footprints long before it leaves headlines. Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. Every story painted the same picture. Not a billionaire seeking recognition. Not an ambitious executive climbing toward greater influence. Simply a man who consistently chose people over prestige. Daniel Brooks quietly slid another folder toward her beneath the table. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside rested an old newspaper clipping she had somehow never seen. The headline described Ethan's resignation from one of the country's most prestigious strategic consulting firms 12 years earlier. At the bottom of the article appeared a single sentence that captured her attention. He stepped away from national leadership responsibilities following the unexpected passing of his wife to devote himself entirely to raising his young son. Victoria slowly closed the folder. Across the table, Ethan answered a technical question about infrastructure resilience with remarkable clarity, explaining complicated engineering principles in language every person in the room could understand. He never interrupted anyone. He credited every team involved rather than highlighting his own contribution. Even when others praised his work, he redirected attention toward collaboration. The respect surrounding him no longer seemed mysterious. It seemed inevitable. During a brief pause, one commissioner smiled toward Ethan. "You have been offered leadership positions that most professionals spend their entire careers chasing. Do you ever regret saying no?" Ethan thought quietly before answering. "Success is meaningful. But when my son needed his father more than the world needed another executive, the decision became very simple." Complete silence settled over the conference hall. No presentation slide, financial projection, or corporate achievement carried the same weight as those words. Victoria lowered her eyes toward the polished conference table, and for the first time in many years, she began wondering whether the greatest mistake of her life had not been a failed business decision, but failing to recognize the extraordinary value of an ordinary-looking man standing quietly in front of her all along. The remainder of the strategic review unfolded with remarkable efficiency. Every proposal was examined carefully, every concern addressed with patience rather than pride, and every disagreement resolved through thoughtful discussion instead of authority. Ethan listened more than he spoke, taking careful notes before offering recommendations that somehow satisfied competing interests without diminishing anyone's contribution. By early afternoon, the final agreement was ready for approval. One by one, signatures appeared across the official documents until the last folder was quietly closed. The moderator smiled with visible relief. Ladies and gentlemen, congratulations. This partnership is now officially approved. Gentle applause filled the conference hall, but Victoria barely heard it. Her attention remained fixed on Ethan as executives and government leaders gathered around him, not seeking favors, but expressing sincere gratitude. There was no competition for his attention, no exaggerated praise, only genuine respect earned through years of quiet service. When the room gradually began to empty, Victoria remained seated, staring at the polished table where her reflection looked older than she remembered. Daniel approached carefully. "Ma'am, your car is ready whenever you are." She looked toward Ethan, who was placing documents into his worn leather portfolio. "Please wait outside," she said softly. Daniel nodded and quietly left the room. For the first time in many years, Victoria Harrison found herself walking toward someone without knowing whether she deserved to be heard. Ethan noticed her approaching and stopped what he was doing. His expression remained calm, exactly as it had the evening she had rejected him. Before he could speak, Victoria lowered her eyes. "I owe you an apology." The words came slowly, as though they had traveled a great distance before finally reaching daylight. "Not because of your position, not because of today, because I judged your worth before I ever learned your character." Ethan remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I spent my entire life teaching young executives not to make decisions without sufficient information," she said with a faint, painful smile. "Then I made the most important decision of my life after looking only at your suit, your bank account, and your title." Her voice trembled slightly. "I never looked at your heart." The conference hall seemed unusually quiet, the afternoon sunlight stretching across the hardwood floor in long golden beams. Ethan spoke gently. "We all see the world through experiences that shaped us." Victoria slowly shook her head. "That explanation may comfort me, but it does not excuse me." She looked directly into his eyes for the first time, without pride standing between them. "I did not only reject you. I hurt my own daughter because I believe success could only wear one face." Ethan smiled softly, not with victory, but with understanding. "Emily has never stopped loving you." Victoria blinked in surprise. "After everything I said, love does not disappear because someone makes a painful mistake," Ethan answered quietly. "Sometimes it simply waits for humility to open the door again." Tears gathered in Victoria's eyes before she could hide them. For years, she had believed strength meant never appearing vulnerable. Yet standing before the man she had underestimated, she discovered that admitting failure required far greater courage than defending pride. She took a slow breath. "Would she even want to see me?" Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. Without hesitation, he opened a recent photograph. Emily stood beside Noah in the backyard, both smiling while holding a tray of homemade cookies. Victoria's eyes rested on the picture for several quiet moments. Her daughter looked genuinely happy, not because of wealth, but because she belonged somewhere she was deeply loved. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Come to dinner on Sunday," he said gently. "No speeches, no business, just family." Victoria closed her eyes briefly as a single tear escaped despite every attempt to remain composed. She realized that the greatest gift she had been offered that day was not a second chance to repair a relationship, It was forgiveness she had not yet earned, freely offered, by the very man she had once believed had nothing of value to give. Sunday arrived beneath a bright autumn sky, and the little house on Maple Street carried the comforting aroma of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and warm apple pie drifting through open kitchen windows. Golden leaves danced gently across the front yard, while Noah carefully arranged four-place settings around the worn oak dining table. "Do you think Grandma Victoria likes mashed potatoes?" he asked with innocent curiosity. Emily smiled while smoothing the tablecloth. "I do not know, sweetheart." Ethan looked up from carving the chicken and answered with his familiar quiet confidence. "Then today, she gets to discover she does." A few moments later, the sound of a single car door closing echoed outside. No security convoy followed. No assistants hurried ahead. No photographers waited by the sidewalk. Victoria Harrison walked slowly toward the front porch, carrying nothing more than a simple homemade peach cobbler resting inside a glass baking dish. She paused before ringing the doorbell, taking one deep breath, as though preparing for the most important meeting of her life. The door opened before she could knock. Emily stood there quietly. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Years of love, disappointment, pride, and longing seemed to gather between them without a single word. Then Victoria whispered, "I am so sorry." Emily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother without hesitation. The embrace lasted far longer than either expected. Sometimes forgiveness begins not with perfect words, but with the courage to stop holding on to yesterday. When they entered the house, Noah smiled brightly. "Welcome, Grandma Victoria." The title caught her completely by surprise. Tears immediately filled her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have never been called that before." Noah gently took the dessert from her hands. "Dad says guests are not supposed to carry things inside." Victoria looked toward Ethan, who simply smiled and nodded as he carried another serving bowl to the table. No speeches followed. No one revisited old arguments. They shared dinner the way families have for generations, passing bread, laughing over Noah's stories from school, complimenting Emily's vegetables from the backyard garden, and quietly enjoying the peaceful rhythm of ordinary life. Halfway through the meal, Victoria looked around the small dining room. The furniture was simple. The walls displayed children's drawings beside family photographs instead of expensive paintings. Nothing inside the house reflected extraordinary wealth, yet everything reflected extraordinary love. She finally understood the difference. After dessert, the four of them stepped into the backyard as the setting sun painted the sky with shades of amber and crimson. Noah chased colorful leaves while Emily leaned gently against Ethan's shoulder. Victoria watched them for a long moment before speaking softly. "I spent decades building an empire because I believed success would protect the people I loved." She smiled sadly. "I never realized love was protecting them long before money ever could." Ethan looked across the quiet yard where Noah laughed as the wind carried another swirl of autumn leaves. "A family is never measured by what it owns," he said gently. "It is measured by what it refuses to lose." Victoria slowly nodded, understanding those words in a way she never had before. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Emily asked a passing neighbor to take a photograph. The four of them stood together on the front porch, smiling naturally beneath the warm porch light. There are no business awards, no luxury cars, no symbols of status in the picture. Only 3 generations brought together by humility, forgiveness, and second chances. Sometimes the richest person in the room is not the one with the largest fortune. Sometimes it is the quiet soul whose dignity remains untouched by applause, whose kindness survives rejection, and whose grace chooses forgiveness when pride would demand revenge. Long after titles fade and fortunes change hands, that kind of wealth continues growing inside every heart willing to choose love first.